Afternoon at a regional airport in Texas. The check-in area is a sea of frustrated faces, delayed flights flashing red on the monitors. Ethan Ward, 41, stands at the service counter. He wears an old canvas jacket, carrying a small backpack, his 9-year-old son, Leo, at his side. He asks quietly, "Is there any way to get on the next outbound flight?" The clerk checks her screen with a smirk. "Everything is fully booked. You picked the wrong day to travel, sir." Behind her, another staff member snickers. "Not unless you have a private option." Ethan nods. He dials his phone. "We're here." Now, listen. Ethan Ward was a man of steel, silence, and absolute rhythmic routine. At 41, his face was a map of quiet focus and the deep, enduring weariness of a man who lived two lives, one to keep the digital world running and one to keep a small home safe. He was a freelance systems integrity engineer, a ghost architect who specialized in fixing the high-level data networks that global logistics firms relied on. He didn't have a permanent office with a view of the skyline. He didn't have a corporate ID that granted him access to executive lounges or the company gym. He was the man in the simple button-down shirt who sat at a folding table in the corner of technical labs, surrounded by tangled fiber optic cables and cold coffee. Ethan chose this life by design. He was a single father to 9-year-old Leo. 5 years ago, his world had been surgically hollowed out when his wife, Sarah, passed away after a brief but devastating battle with illness. Since that day, Ethan had systematically dismantled his old high-pressure career at a major aerospace firm. He had been the man who designed the safety protocols for entire fleets of commercial aircraft. He didn't want the 60-hour weeks, the international flights, or the quarterly bonuses anymore. He needed a life with a hard stop, a life that allowed him to be at the school gate at 3 p.m. and on the sofa for bedtime stories about space explorers at 8 p.m. He traded the prestige of a VP title for the flexibility of a contractor because his son's smile was the only currency he cared about. Their life together was defined by a philosophy of aggressive simplicity. They lived in a modest house, drove an aging truck that rattled when it hit 40 miles per hour, and spent their weekends hiking in the woods or building model rockets from scratch. Ethan taught Leo that wealth wasn't about the balance in your bank account, but about the integrity you carried and the things you could do for others without ever asking for credit. He wore clothes that were durable and comfortable, not expensive. To the outside world, he looked like a struggling tradesman or a mid-level technician who was just trying to make ends meet. He was invisible to the people who measured success in designer labels and luxury cars, and he liked it that way. Invisibility was his greatest form of protection. When they traveled, Ethan usually chose commercial flights. He liked the grounding experience of being among people. He wanted Leo to understand the patience required to wait in a long line and the value of a carefully planned budget. He never felt the need to use his old industry connections to bypass the system. He was content to be just another passenger until the system itself became the obstacle to his family. On this particular afternoon, they were in a small Texas hub trying to get to a family reunion in Houston. A massive storm front to the north had grounded the regional fleet, leaving hundreds of travelers stranded and angry. The air in the terminal was thick with the scent of recycled oxygen, burnt coffee, and mounting human frustration. Ethan stood at the service desk, his hand resting on Leo's shoulder. He wasn't in a panic. He was used to debugging chaotic systems. He knew that pressure only made the person at the terminal move slower. He watched the human factor failing all around him. Businessmen shouting into their phones, children crying, and staff members retreating into a defensive, cold professionalism. Leo looked up at the flight board, which was a sea of canceled notices. "Are we going to miss the party, Dad? Grandma said she was making the big cake today." Ethan gave a small, reassuring squeeze to Leo's hand. "We're looking for a solution, pal. Remember the rule? A problem is just a puzzle that hasn't been put together yet. We just need to find the right piece." To the staff behind the counter, Ethan was a low-priority variable. They saw the scuffed boots and the lack of a first-class badge on his bag. They saw the wrinkled jacket and the tired eyes. They assumed he lacked the resources or the status to be demanding. In their world, if you weren't flying premium, You were essentially part of the background noise. They didn't see the mind that had designed the very air traffic control synchronization logic they were currently using to manage the delays. They only saw a man who looked like he couldn't afford a seat upgrade, unaware that Ethan Ward was the reason the sky remained organized during a storm. In the real world, appearance is the ultimate camouflage. Many people choose to live simply not because they have to, but because they have realized that true freedom is found in needing nothing from the crowd. The most powerful person in the room is often the one who is perfectly happy to be ignored. Position doesn't define capacity, it only defines a chair. The airport service counter was a theater of human frustration. Sarah, the lead gate agent, was reaching her breaking point. She had been dealing with angry business travelers and crying families for 4 grueling hours. To her, every person in line was a problem to be dismissed as quickly as possible. When Ethan finally reached the front, she barely looked up from her flickering keyboard. Her face was a mask of cold, bureaucratic exhaustion. "Next outbound to Houston?" Sarah asked, her voice flat and mechanical, like a pre-recorded message. "Is there any way to get on the next flight, even as standby?" Ethan asked politely. "My son has a family event he's been looking forward to for months. It's quite important to him." Sarah performed a performative, 3-second scan of her screen. She didn't really look at the availability. She looked at the economy tag on Ethan's record. "Fully booked. Standby list is already 30 people deep. You picked the wrong day to travel, sir. Unless you're a platinum member or have a government priority voucher, you're looking at a hotel stay tonight. Move along, please." Behind her, a junior colleague named Mark was leaning against the printer, holding a lukewarm coffee and checking his watch. He glanced at Ethan's old canvas jacket, the one with the faint oil stain on the cuff from a morning repair Ethan had done on his own truck. Mark let out a short, mocking breath, a sound that carried a heavy weight of unearned arrogance. "Look, pal," Mark said, smirking. "The bus station is 2 miles down the road. It might be more your speed today. This terminal is at capacity for people with actual tickets, not unless you have a private option, of course." Sarah and Mark shared a shallow, knowing look. They expected Ethan to get angry, to plead for help, or to walk away defeated like the dozens of people before him. They were used to economy passengers who didn't understand the hierarchy of the sky. To them, Ethan's lack of status made his situation an easy target for their cynical humor. They viewed him as a nobody, a person who had no leverage in a world built on power. Ethan didn't react to the mockery. He didn't flush with anger or try to explain his technical background. He didn't tell them that he had personally audited the software they were currently using. He simply looked at Sarah, his hazel eyes calm and observant. He saw the fatigue in her face, but he also saw the unearned arrogance in Mark's posture. He realized that they weren't being mean because they were bad people. They were being mean because they were blind. They had forgotten how to see the person behind the ticket. "I see," Ethan said. "So there are truly no commercial alternatives?" "Not for you," Sarah replied, already looking past him at the passenger in the next line. "Please step aside, sir. You're blocking the flow." Ethan stepped to the side, away from the frantic hum of the crowd. He stood by a large glass window, watching the rain-streaked tarmac where dozens of grounded jets sat idle like sleeping giants. The sky was a bruised shade of purple, lit occasionally by flashes of distant lightning. Leo looked up at him, a bit confused by the way the adults had spoken. Children have a biological radar for disrespect, and Leo's was pinging. "Dad, were they being mean to us? Do they think we're poor because we don't have a gold card?" Ethan knelt down, bringing himself to his son's level. He wasn't looking at the desk. He was looking at the truth of his son's eyes. "No, Leo, they aren't mean. They're just looking at the clothes and the stickers. They've forgotten that every person has a different story. They're making a guess based on the surface. But we don't need their permission to move, do we? Sometimes you have to change the frequency to hear the message." Ethan took his phone from his pocket. He didn't scroll through a travel app or call a customer service line. He hit a single speed dial button. "It's Ethan," he said into the phone. His voice was no longer the soft, patient voice of a dad. It was the resonant, commanding baritone of a man who gave instructions to CEOs and generals. "We're at the regional hub in Tyler. Commercial is a total blackout due to the storm. We're here. Gate 4, requesting immediate relocation. He listened for 3 seconds, then hung up. Wait here, pal, he said to Leo. The puzzle is about to solve itself. Just watch the runway. Ethan stood perfectly still, watching the clock on the wall. He didn't check his phone again. He didn't look back at the service desk where Sarah was still dismissing people. He knew how the system worked because he was the one who helped build it. He was a master of direct routing, and he had just triggered a protocol that Sarah and Mark had only ever seen in training manuals. He was about to show them that a jacket can hide a king. People often draw conclusions quickly to save time, but in doing so, they miss the depth of the person standing in front of them. Most judgments are based on the tools someone carries, rather than the skill they possess. True intelligence is the ability to wait with dignity while the world assumes you have nowhere to go. Laughter is easy when you don't know the full story. Inside the airport's operations tower, the atmosphere was chaotic. The chief dispatcher, a man named Henderson, who had been on duty for 12 hours, was staring at a screen displaying the ground traffic map. Dozens of commercial airliners were stacked up like toys, waiting for a weather window. But then a new icon flickered on the display, a Priority 1 signal from a private hangar on the far side of the airfield. It was pulsing with a deep, authoritative violet. "What's that?" Henderson asked, pointing at the blinking icon. "It's a VIP unscheduled pickup request, sir," the junior controller replied, his fingers flying across the keys. "Flight authorization code, Vanguard 01. It's a direct bypass protocol. They're requesting immediate taxi clearance to the service bay next to the main terminal." "Sir, that's a factory-owned tail number." Henderson's eyebrows shot up. "Vanguard? That's the R&D wing for the primary fleet manufacturers. We only see those codes during high-level system audits or national security events. Who's the passenger? Is it the governor?" The controller checked the encrypted manifest. His face went from professional to stunned in 3 seconds. He looked at the name again to be sure. "The name on the clearance is Ethan Ward. Sir, the record says he's the lead architect for the new navigation grid. He's the man who signs off on the safety certificates for our entire regional network. The tower is reporting that a private transport vehicle is already moving toward Gate 4. Down at the service counter, Sarah and Mark were still mocking a woman about her overweight luggage when Sarah's radio crackled with a high-priority tone. It was a sound that only meant one thing, a direct order from the top floor. "Service desk, this is operations!" The dispatcher's voice boomed, sounding uncharacteristically sharp and urgent. "We have a Priority 1 pickup confirmed for a passenger at your station. Name Ethan Ward. A private shuttle is entering the tarmac now. You are instructed to escort Mr. Ward and his party to the service door at Gate 4 immediately. The aircraft is already in the final taxi sequence. Do not delay. This is a factory direct request." Sarah froze. Her hand stopped midair over her keyboard. She looked at Mark. Mark looked at the radio, then slowly, painfully, turned his head to look at the man in the faded jacket standing by the window. "Ethan Ward?" Sarah whispered. She looked at her screen again, frantically searching the general manifest for that name. She finally found it, buried in the standby list. It didn't have a status icon. It didn't have a frequent flyer badge. It just said economy. But the system was now lighting up with a level of urgency usually reserved for heart transplants or visiting heads of state. The internal terminal gates were being remotely unlocked by the security team. A black service vehicle, with its yellow beacons flashing through the rain, was already visible on the tarmac, speeding toward the service door. Sarah stepped around the counter, her face a mosaic of red and white. She walked toward Ethan, her heels clicking nervously on the tile. Mark followed behind, his previous arrogance replaced by a look of raw, unshielded terror. They realized they hadn't just mocked a budget traveler. They had insulted a legend in their own industry. They had mocked the architect of their own career paths. "Mr. Ward?" Sarah said, her voice shaking like a leaf in the wind. Ethan turned around slowly. He didn't look triumphant. He didn't look angry. He just looked at her with the same neutral, calm gaze he used for a technical audit. Yes, sir, we we just received a high-priority signal from operations, Sarah stammered, unable to meet his eyes. Your private transport is ready. We had no idea who you were. The system. It didn't flag your credentials properly. We are so sorry for the misunderstanding earlier. That's because I'm not here as a credential, Ethan said quietly, his voice cutting through her apology. I'm here as a father taking his son to a family party. The credentials belong to the office. The man belongs to the family. My son and I were perfectly happy to wait for a commercial seat, until we were told the bus station was our best option. Mark tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. He saw Leo looking at him with a 9-year-old's unclouded judgment. He realized that the nobody he had mocked was the person who ensured his job was actually possible. He felt the weight of his own smallness. The security doors behind them slid open with a heavy mechanical click. A man in a high-visibility vest with a duty manager badge stepped in. He walked straight to Ethan and offered a crisp, respectful nod. Mr. Ward, sir, an honor to see you again. We've cleared a priority lane for you. The pilot is holding the slot for only 5 minutes before the next cell hits. Please follow me. The experts at the counter stood in a vacuum of silence. They watched as the man in the old jacket and the boy with the small backpack were escorted through the restricted doors. The truth hadn't been shouted. It had simply arrived through the rhythmic click of a security lock. They had missed the giant because they were too busy looking for a suit. The most impactful truths are often the quietest. In many situations, the system knows who you are, even when the people running it do not. Accuracy and integrity don't care about your job title. They only care about the record. When the signal finally changes, the loudest voices are always the first to go silent. Character is a silent language. The walk through the service corridor was short and clinical. Sarah and Mark watched through the thick security glass as Ethan and Leo stepped out onto the tarmac. The rain was still coming down in heavy sheets, but the black service vehicle was there to shield them from the wind. The freeze moment didn't happen in the hallway. It happened when the black SUV stopped next to a sleek, white and silver private jet, a Gulfstream G650. This wasn't just a charter. It was a factory-owned prototype, a machine that most people only saw in high-end magazines. The engines were already whining, a powerful, balanced hum that vibrated through the terminal windows and into the chests of everyone watching. Mark stood by the glass, his mouth half open. He looked at the tail number. Vanguard 01. He knew that aircraft from the trade journals. It was the flight test lab, the most sophisticated business jet in the world. He realized then that Ethan Ward didn't just have a private option. He had the keys to the future of aviation. He was the one who decided if these machines were safe enough for the world. We told him to go to the bus station, Mark muttered, his face turning a sickly shade of ash gray. I joked about his jacket. I called him a janitor. Sarah didn't answer. She was watching Ethan help Leo up the stairs. She saw the way the pilot, a man with 4 gold stripes on his shoulders and decades of experience, stepped down to personally greet them. He didn't offer a handshake. He stood at attention. The janitor-looking father was being treated like a king by the elite of the elite. The silence at the service desk was deafening now. The other passengers in line who had witnessed the earlier interaction were now looking at Sarah and Mark with a mixture of contempt and amusement. The hierarchy of the airport had just been flipped on its head. The people who thought they were important were now the ones who looked incredibly small. Ethan turned at the top of the stairs. He looked back at the terminal window. He didn't wave a middle finger. He didn't gloat. He simply offered a small, respectful nod to the window, a silent acknowledgement of the lesson he had just delivered. He wasn't looking at the managers. He was looking at the system. Then he entered the cabin. The heavy door of the Gulfstream hissed shut and sealed with a sound of absolute finality. The stairs retracted. Seconds later, the jet began its taxi sequence, moving past the long lines of grounded commercial planes as if they weren't even there. The tower gave them priority clearance, pausing 100 scheduled flights just to let Vanguard 01 take the sky. The freeze in that terminal changed the DNA of the staff forever. Sarah and Mark realized that they had been measuring people by the wrong metrics for years. They had been leading by the labels, and they were blind to the character. They had missed the giant because they were too busy looking for a suit. They had tried to make a man feel small, only to find out they were the ones standing in the shadows. When the truth is undeniable, there is no need for a speech. The silence of a stunned observer is the most honest reaction a person can receive. In the end, people don't remember what you said you were. They only remember what you were willing to do when the world was watching. A private jet is just a tool. The character of the man inside it is the real power. The flight to Houston was the quietest of Leo's life. Inside the Gulf Stream, the air was still and smelled of leather and expensive wood. Ethan sat at a large mahogany table, his laptop open, already reviewing a series of technical logs for the Houston power grid. He moved from the role of dad to the role of engineer with a seamless grace. Leo watched the reins sliding off the wing at 500 miles per hour. "Dad?" he asked, his voice hushed by the luxury. "Yeah, pal? Why didn't you tell those people at the desk that you were a big boss? You could have made them stop being mean to you an hour ago. You could have shown them your phone or your special badge." Ethan closed his laptop and looked at his son. He saw the curiosity and the developing wisdom in Leo's eyes. He smiled, a real unburdened smile that made the luxury of the cabin feel secondary. "Because they didn't need to know Leo," Ethan said softly. "You see, if I have to tell someone who I am to get their respect, then their respect isn't real. It's just a reaction to a title. I wanted them to see the man in the old jacket. I wanted them to have the choice to be kind to a stranger. That's the only way you know if a person's heart is working correctly." "But they weren't kind," Leo noted, thinking of Sarah's cold voice. "And that was their choice," Ethan replied. "But their choice doesn't change who I am. Real confidence isn't about the jet or the office on the top floor. It's about knowing your value even when you're standing in a budget line. If you know you are enough, you don't have to prove it to people who are only looking at the surface. The surface is just paint, Leo. The frame is what holds the weight." Leo thought about this for a long time, watching the clouds break as they reached the Texas coast. "So, the jet is just a tool?" "Exactly. It's a tool to get us to the party. The party is the important part. The people we love are the important part. The rest is just data." When they landed in Houston, a commercial agent met them at the private terminal. He had been sent by Sarah from the previous airport. He looked embarrassed, holding a formal letter of apology and a voucher for VIP status for their next 10 flights. Ethan took the letter but handed the voucher back. "Give this to the next family you see who is stranded with a tired kid," Ethan said. "They need it more than I do. And tell Sarah, it's okay. Just remember to check the eyes next time, not the ticket. The ticket doesn't talk." The agent nodded, his eyes wide with a new kind of respect. As Ethan and Leo walked toward their taxi, the Gulf Stream roared back into the sky behind them. Ethan didn't look back. He was holding his son's hand, talking about what kind of cake they were going to have at the reunion and whether they should build a bigger model rocket next weekend. True confidence. True. It isn't found in a title, a bank account, or a private jet. It's found in the quiet decision to be yourself, even when the world is asking for a performance. Ethan Ward was home, and for the first time in 5 years, the view was perfect. True respect is a silent currency. You don't earn it by shouting your status. You earn it by the integrity you carry when no one knows your name. The strongest bridge between two people is never a title. It's the shared humanity of a moment. Never judge a person by their cover. You might be looking at the author of the whole story. Value is not something you demand. It is something you carry in your presence. The person you judge most quickly is often the one with the most power to help you. Respect shouldn't be a transaction based on appearance. It should be a baseline for every human interaction. Don't be afraid to be the man in the old jacket. If you believe that respect shouldn't depend on appearances, subscribe for more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, would you have treated him differently? Have you ever been underestimated?